Hello and welcome. I'm Peter Kelly, and this is my podcast. And today we're diving into the disparity in sports viewership between men's and women's sports. Now, if you're a sports fan, or even if you're not, you probably noticed this disparity. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Today we're going to explore this issue through the lens of theories of hegemony, identity, consumption, and mass media. Together, let's break down how these ideas help us understand and hopefully challenge inequities in sports viewership. Let's dive right in. Why and how, even in 2024, female athletes are often overlooked? Is it simply about their skill and performance, or does it tie into deeper societal and cultural structures? Let's explore these questions using concepts from cultural theory, including audience, Gramsci's idea of hegemony, and the relationship between culture, consumption, and identity. Let's start with the numbers. Globally, men's sports dominate viewership, sponsorship, and media coverage. For example, in 2023 FIFA's Women's World Cup, a record-breaking 2 billion viewers tuned in. But that still pales compared to the over 3 billion who watched the 2022 Men's World Cup. Why does this gap persist? This is where the concept of audience comes in. Audience is not just passive consumers. They are shaped by broader cultural forces. What sports we watch, how we consume them, and how much we assign to them are influenced by deeply ingrained social norms about gender and power. It's not just soccer. Across the board, women's leagues and tournaments are often seen as secondary to men's. From basketball to tennis to track and field, women's sports are sidelined not because they lack talent or excitement, but because of deep-seated cultural narratives. So, what's shaping these patterns? Let's bring in Antonio Gramsci's theory of hegemony. Gramsci's argued that dominant social groups maintain power not just through coercion, but through consent. In context of sports, hegemonic masculinity perpetuates the idea that men's sports are more natural, exciting, or worthy of investment. Take, for instance, the narratives about physicality in sports. The emphasis on strength, speed, and aggression in men's sports aligns with traditional ideas of masculinity, making them appear more valuable. Women's sports, by contrast, are often framed as less competitive or less entertaining. Despite countless examples proving otherwise, this hegemony isn't just reflected in coverage, but reinforced by it. Media outlets underrepresent women's sports or focus on their personal lives rather than their athletic achievements, shaping public perception and ultimately suppressing demand. Audiences aren't just passive spectators. What we choose to watch or don't watch is heavily influenced by cultural norms and narratives. Take gender norms, for example. Men's sports are often framed as more natural, aggressive, or thrilling. This reinforced the idea that male athletes are the pinnacle of competition, while women's sports are seen as niche or less serious. Now, media plays a massive role here. Coverage of men's sports tend to highlight athletic performance, big plays, or dramatic rivalries. Intense physicality, as well as the desire to win, are what is covered the most. Women's sports, on the other hand, are often trivialized or sexualized. For instance, how often have we seen headlines focusing on a female athlete's appearance or possibly their outfit rather than her achievements? This kind of coverage shapes audience expectations. If we're told again and again that men's sports are more exciting, guess what? That's what the audience will believe. But here's the thing. These narratives don't just appear out of nowhere. They are part of a larger system of power and control, something cultural theorist Antonio Gramsci called hegemony. Gramsci's idea of hegemony explains how power is maintained, not just through force but through consent. In other words, dominant groups shape cultural values in ways that seem natural or common sense. In the world of sports, hegemonic masculinity promotes the idea that men's sports are superior, while women's sports are seen as less deserving of attention. This isn't just an accident, it's a reflection of broader power dynamics in society. Think about it. Male athletes are celebrated for their strength, skill, and leadership, meanwhile female athletes are reduced to their personal lives. How many times have you seen a women's sport focus on motherhood or relationship instead of performance? This imbalance reinforces the status quo, making it harder for women's sports to gain visibility and respect they deserve. Now let's zoom out a bit and talk about cultural products. Sports aren't just games, they're a part of how we identify ourselves as individuals and society. For many men, engaging with sports, watching games, supporting teams becomes a way to affirm traditional masculinity. Men's sports are marketed as epic battles, arenas where strength and dominance are put on display, while women's sports, on the other hand, are often excluded from these cultural narratives. And when they are included, they're marketed differently, sometimes as family-friendly entertainment, sometimes as empowerment stories, but rarely, however, are they given the same level of drama as the men's sports. This ties directly into consumption pattern. Some sponsors and advertisers overwhelmingly favor men's sports, pouring money into high-profile events like the Super Bowl or NBA Finals. This investment creates a cycle. More resources mean better facilities, higher pay, and more visibility for men's sports, which in turn attracts more fans and sponsors. Women's sports, despite the equal level of competitiveness and talent, are left to fight for the scraps. It's also important to recognize that gender isn't the only factor that plays here. Intersexuality shows us that race, class, sexuality all shape how athletes are viewed and supported. Additionally, are additional layers to inequality. Women of color in sports often face unique challenges, from being stereotyped as aggressive or unfeminine to being completely overlooked by media outlets. This lack of visibility not only affects their careers but also deprives young athletes from being seen as role models who look up to them. The stories of athletes like Serena Williams or Simone Biles are expectations rather than the rule, or exceptions, rather than the main rule. And even they have faced backlash rooted in race and gender biases. Similarly, LGBTQ plus athletes in women's sports experience hyper scrutiny that overshadows their athletic achievements. Instead of being celebrated for the talent, frequently they are reduced to their identities in ways that male athletes rarely are. This forces them to navigate both the pressure of performing at an elite level and the burden of breaking stereotypes or pushing for broader social acceptance. Class also plays a significant role here. Access to sports, particularly at a higher level, often requires financial resource, whether the training, equipment, or travel. This means that athletes from a lower income backgrounds, regardless of talent, are less likely to reach the top levels of competition. These layers of marginalization create a compound effect. Women already fighting for recognition in the sport must navigate additional barriers based on race, class, sexuality, making it even harder for them to gain visibility, support, and sponsorships that they deserve. See where I'm going with this? There are so many levels to this that hold certain groups back from reaching the top. To address these inequalities, we need to think intersectionally, recognizing that supporting women's sports means uplifting all women, regardless of race, background, or identity. This means creating a space where all athletes can thrive without being limited by biases of society. Now let's talk about the role of media ownership in shaping sports coverage, and more importantly, how it perpetrates the prioritization of male sports over female sports. Here's the reality. The majority of sports media is controlled by a handful of large corporations. These company networks like ESPN, Fox Sports, or CBS operate with profit as their primary goal. Because male sports are perceived as more lucrative, these corporations focus their resources on promoting and broadcasting men's leagues and events. Take the NFL or the NBA, for example. These leagues receive massive airtime, high-budget advertisements, and prime-time slots. It's not because women's sports lack excitement or talent, it's because male sports have historically been positioned as the default main event. Media companies are reinforcing this perception by pouring their energy into what they think will sell. But this isn't just about airtime. The way women's sports are covered, or not covered, also plays a role. In 2019, a study found that only 4% of sports media coverage in the US focused on women's sports. Think about that for a second. For every 100 minutes of sports coverage, only 4 minutes are about women's teams or athletes. And when women's sports do get covered, it's often framed differently. media outlets tend to focus on female athletes' personal lives or appearance rather than their skills or achievements. This kind of coverage limits the public's understanding of women's serious competitive athletic abilities and reinforcing them with outdated stereotypes. So what does this mean for women's sports? With limited visibility, it becomes harder to attract sponsors, build larger audience, and create lasting legacies. This cycle of underrepresentation keeps women's sports from reaching the top of their full potential, despite their incredible talent and energy they bring to the table. If we want to change this narrative, it starts with media companies taking responsibility. They need to allocate equal resources, promote women's events with the same energy, and tell the story of female athletes with the respect and recognition they deserve. So how do we change the game? First, we need to see more equitable media coverage. Broadcasters and journalists must treat women's sports with the same seriousness and enthusiasm as men's. This means covering women's games during primetime slots, highlighting their achievements in headlines, and eliminating gender stereotypes in reporting. It's not just about representation, it's about respect and recognition. Second, sponsors need to step up. Investing in women's sports isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. Studies show that audiences are hungry for diverse stories and representation in sports. Companies that align with their brand with women's sports can tap into increasingly social conscious consumer base. Sponsorships not only help individual athletes and teams thrive, but also increase the overall visibility of women's sports. Third, the educational system and organizations play a critical role. Young girls need equal access to sports programs, better facilities, and the opportunity to see female athletes as role models. By encouraging participation from an early age, we can help foster a future where women's sports are valued as much as men's. Finally, as individuals, we can all make a difference. Watch women's games, share highlights on social media, celebrate the achievements of female athletes in conversation with friends and family, support local and national women's teams by attending games and purchasing their merchandise. Every action counts, and collectively, they can create the demand needed to drive the systemic change. The time to act is now. By changing how we view women's sports, we can help create a more equitable and inclusive future for all athletes. At the end of the day, the disparity in sports viewership isn't about skill or excitement. It's about the stories we tell as a society. Women athletes bring the same passion, dedication, and competitiveness as their male counterparts, yet outdated cultural narratives and systemic inequalities hold them back. By challenging these narratives and advocating for equity, we have the power to reshape the sports world. Equitable media coverage, increased sponsorships, and support can transform our current reality, giving female athletes the visibility and recognition they deserve. This isn't just about fairness, it's about building a richer, more inclusive culture of sports, one where every athlete has the opportunity to inspire and connect with the audiences. Together, we can create a future where talent, not gender, determines who gets to stand in the spotlight. And the change starts with us. Every game we watch, every story we share, every conversation we have matters. Because when we uplift women in sports, we're not just changing sports, we're changing society. Thanks for listening to my podcast, and hopefully we learned something we can take away from this moment and think about in our future everyday lives. Take care for now. Yours truly, Peter Kelly.